Hi, my name is Hope Leong, and I've decided to look more into mental health care for LGBTQ plus Asian Americans. LGBTQ as in a lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, questioning plus. Um, and later on, I'll be referring to Asian Americans as API as well, just for a little bit of precursory information. But yeah, just to talk a little bit about why I chose these specific groups and their intersectional identity to research for my paper is that I myself identify with both of those groups. And so I thought it'd be interesting to see more on a broad level the mental health impacts that are shaped by these identities and how they uniquely push and pull in some ways and ultimately come together to shape many people's experiences who fall under this demographic. I myself have had some experiences in the mental health care system that have been positive, some negative, and I've also heard that from other people that I know. So yeah, that's a little bit of my own personal interest into the subject. But moving into mental health impacts, some mental health challenges that this group is facing include depression, anxiety, and stress. Just to see some stats about depression from the Trevor Project, who is doing some really amazing and interesting survey work. This was back in 2021. They conducted a survey specifically among AAPI and LGBTQ youth. 62% of the people who participated reported symptoms of depression, as well as 68% of them reporting symptoms of anxiety in that past year. So it's really, really alarming to see that, especially just in youth today, that those levels are so prominent, and really seeing why those levels are so high. Moving into social factors in relation to those reasons why. We have cultural norms for academics and also this cultural attitude towards mental health care. These are two little subtopics in a sense, but academics, there's this cultural value of academics and success, and it comes most often, I've seen it come from a place of love, but ultimately it is a recurring thing and a pattern that I've seen with a lot of people that I personally know, and also in some of the studies I've found. Um, One study did find that more culture-oriented a student was, the more likely their emotions would be negatively impacted by academic issues, and the greater their daily total cortisol levels would be, which is the chemical associated with stress. And so ultimately there is this great amount of pressure from family and the people around you. When there is that, there's so much more stress. Even if you're doing well, there's just this big weight of expectation on you, which is just something that could be a positive or negative thing if it motivates you. But overall, yes. And then in response to that, mental health care, finding the care that they need. This survey for specifically adults 18 and up with any mental illness back in 2021. Only 25% of the respondents who were Asian said that they had received mental health services. So yeah, I interpreted that as um, not only there were barriers to receiving mental health services, but also maybe an unwillingness to want to seek out those resources as well. Another social factor having to do with cultural attitudes about sexuality. I thought this map was interesting, is that I didn't realize that there were so many countries in Asia who don't have marriage equality as like a legally binding law in their countries. So I thought maybe that is an interesting reflection on how there are many traditionally unaccepting Asian cultures, um, and that kind of translates over to Asian American culture, especially if people are in a first generation or just very traditional family with those specific values. And it's not just an Asian American thing, but in a lot of different specific cultures, that could be religion factoring into that as well. There's a lot of history and ideas that come into play here. But yeah, that's one interesting association between those two ideas. And finally, societal discrimination. there's there's a lot that can happen when you feel outcast for either being Asian or being gay or being Asian and gay. And so really finding this space to be in where you feel seen can be very difficult if you feel shunned by different groups of people that you identified with because they don't accept all of you. And even in just social spaces, sometimes it could be difficult to find someone to look up to and see yourself in those roles of success. So that's another level of lack of representation, but also discrimination where people will actively um, see you as an other. And finally, next steps, moving into how we can address these issues. Breaking down the stigma of mental health care. Mental health care is such a personal subject to so many people that I'm really glad people have started to open up a little bit more about it, but there's still a long way to go in society, but also specifically in Asian American communities. So, talking more about that, being open about experiences, sharing those resources is really important. Increased access to mental health care is also important. One interesting point that my interviewee pointed out was economic and also language barriers that come up when it comes to, um, especially first generation and immigrant families, where that can be a really hard thing to find if you don't understand exactly what someone is saying to you in the mental health care field, as well as not being able to pay. Some of it can be really pricey if you don't have insurance and so on. So that can be definitely big practical barrier to accessing the resources that you need. And finally, cultural competence and representation. It's really powerful to see yourself in general in society, but also in the mental health care field. It's really important for providers to understand that culture and identity is a really important thing to many people. Not everybody will agree, but I personally feel like having someone who understands what it's like to be a person of color or Asian American or being gay is really um, transformative. And there's a lot of things that you don't have to beat around the bush when it comes to picking topics. My first therapist, for example, she was white and she was a lovely woman, but she was a little bit conservative. I assume she was straight. And there was just a lot of subjects that she wouldn't really touch on, like when I was talking about my sexuality, or I would just not bring it up to begin with because I could tell it made her feel a little bit uncomfortable and stuff like that. There was just this level of disconnect between the two of us. And so it's really important to be able to connect with somebody. It doesn't have to be, oh, they have to be Asian, they have to be gay, and fit, check all the boxes. But I think it's really important to have something in common, a level of trust to lay down that groundwork. So even if someone just understands better in cultural competency or getting more people like us or like you to fill those roles as mental health care providers can be really powerful. And yeah, so that was the end. These are my references. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to what I've been researching. And yeah, I'm looking forward to watching and listening to what you guys have to say and about your experiences as well. Thanks.